Welcome to the first edition of my weekly news podcast, where I will be talking about important news and developments as impartially and unbiased as possible. This week's most important political news has been the conclusion of the climate summit in Glasgow and the important points agreed there. Most of the world's heads of state met in Glasgow to determine what action needed to be taken on climate change. Notable absentees were the Russian president and the president of China. The Australian Prime Minister had previously said that he was considering skipping the summit in order to not spend another 2 weeks in quarantine, though eventually his hand was forced, so he was in attendance. Much has been agreed, and the goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius at worst was once again stressed. Though the first goal is now practically impossible as the world has already warmed up 1.3 Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels, though still hopes are high for 1.5 degrees. Leaders have also pledged to stop and reverse deforestation by 2030. The main goal of the summit is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Russia and many Middle Eastern countries have pledged carbon neutrality by 2060, a decade later, and India has pledged carbon neutrality by 2070. Though as things currently stand, the world will warm to around 2.7 degrees Celsius, just shy of the catastrophic 3 Celsius warming. Another important agreement signed was regarding coal usage as a means of heating and energy generation. Coal is the single largest source of pollution historically, and it is the dirtiest fossil fuel out there. On the final day of the COP26 summit, nations were urged to agree on phasing out coal, though by strong objections made by China and India, which are both heavily dependent on coal. Instead, they have agreed to a new version of the deal which states phasing down coal instead of out. Well, if we really do not want a climate catastrophe, we must be a little hasty on some things, that is for sure. China looks to be one of the worst impacted countries, as much of the coastal plain and the Yellow and Yangtze rivers surroundings are to be flooded. No nation is immune to the effects of climate change, and some will fare worse and some better than others, due to either development and prior planning or by just simple geography. Every nation must recognize this issue as it literally endangers them in a very short period of time. Next on the agenda is humanitarian developments, the most important being the Poland-Belarus migrant crisis and the Afghan starvation crisis. Thousands of migrants have piled up on the Polish border, as many have claimed to be pushed there by Belarusian authorities. It is a saddening situation that people are making that journey. Poland has desperately scrambled a response force and border police to stop the migrants from entering, though many have escaped and many are freezing to death. Unable to go either way, they're stuck at the border. Worst of all though, they are suffering almost sub-zero temperatures in the forested wilderness. Many are reported to have been frozen to death, though it is challenging to get impartial information from the region, as both sides claim their righteousness and innocence and of course blame the other. One thing is for certain though, that thousands of people are stranded on a border when winter is steadily approaching. Now, Afghanistan is next. Following the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan and the disastrous evacuation that ensued, millions are now at risk of starvation. Much of the country's finances were reliant on foreign aid and donations, though now that has all but dried up with the fall of Kabul. The entirety of Afghanistan's foreign currency reserves have been frozen. The Taliban are demanding their return, but as expected and rightfully, so they are not granted them. They might have been successful at taking over the country once again after 20 years, but Afghanistan has changed a lot ever since. Around half of the nation lives in urban centers, and the population has grown to a whopping 40 million. The UN is hoping to send vital humanitarian aid, but it is likely to be very difficult getting it there and feeding so many people. This has very much saddened me, I must say. No country should ever have to go through such a calamity. The people are suffering from an untimely or ill-planned withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, on to economic developments. Inflation has continued to rise across the world and will do so for the foreseeable future. Another crucial problem that is very much related to the previous issue is the driver crisis that has wreaked havoc on supply chains around the world, especially in the developed world. Well, this is not good news. Inflation, in the simplest of terms, is the rise of prices from food to petrol to energy. As the world is recovering from the pandemic lockdowns, people have gone back to their old spending habits, and cafes are now teeming with people. They are yet again driving to work or to parks, and now offices are full once again. Though one thing has been unable to catch up with the demand, of course, the supply. As a result of supply chain problems, prices on shelves are rising or disappearing entirely. Firstly, foodstuff inflation is being caused by droughts, some brought about by climate change and some by other causes. Another critical problem here is that there are not enough workers in the industry, even resulting in some fresh produce to be left rot in the fields. Energy prices are also on the rise. Just watch out for the tag on your utility bills, mainly stemming from production issues yet again. Russia has been unable to cope with the sheer demand, and China has struggled to maintain the stability of its electricity grid. An unusually cold winter in the northern hemisphere has also been a contributing factor. Wouldn't you know it, global warming also causes colder weather. Maybe one of the most significant issues here that is threatening prices of all sorts of commodities and products is the shortage of long-distance drivers. Whatever you call it, truck drivers for the Yanks or lorry drivers for the Brits, there are not enough of them to go around. Many have retired, and young people are not so keen on becoming drivers. It is argued that if the working conditions were to be improved, more people would consider joining. That is good-hearted thinking, but that misses a core issue that is at hand. If all drivers' salaries were to increase, prices of pretty much everything would also increase. A solution has yet to be found, but the least disruptive way, it seems, in my personal opinion, is to invite temporary foreign workers from less developed countries to North America and Europe to fill in the labor shortage. To summarize all the present developments, a critical summit that will determine world action on climate change has taken place. There's a migrant crisis yet again on EU's doorstep. Fortunately, millions of people in Afghanistan are at risk of starvation. And finally, inflation and supply crisis is here, and is going to be here for a while. Thank you very much for listening to the first edition of 10-Minute News, and I hope that you have enjoyed it. Join us next time, and please stay well.